Hello, everyone, and welcome to this The TIE Innovator webinar series. So today we'll be discussing interoperability and the multi-chain future of L1s and L2s. And I'm glad to be joined by Rob Viglione, CEO and founder of zkVerify, Kenny Zhang, ecosystem growth lead at LayerZero, and Terry Chung, chief strategy officer at Eclipse. So thanks a lot for joining us today. We'll be discussing today the evolving role of interoperability, the multi-chain future of L1, L2 networks. We'll explore how advancements in cross-chain communications and innovative bridging protocols and secure interoperability solutions are currently reshaping blockchain ecosystems, what that means, where the building is going, and how everything is taking shape together. Before we get started, as a reminder, this is only for informational purposes, and none of this is intended as investment advice. And without further ado, let's do a quick round of intros with our panelists. And so let's start with you, Rob. Could you tell us a bit more about zkVerify? Explain, how your platform simplifies zero knowledge proof verification across different blockchain ecosystems.
Yeah, 100%. So zkVerify, we're building out and launching later this summer as a universal verification layer for Web3. Now, my background for the company that I run, Horizon Labs, is one that I think lends itself well to talking about this topic on interoperability, because we actually work with the other orgs on the call. What we do is we actually have experience. We launched an L1 back in 2017, right? So we have experience at the L1 level. We're currently migrating that to being an L3 on base, so we can talk about L2s and why you might want to launch on them. And we do a ton of other interoperability work. And zkVerify itself isn't really meant to be this kind of source of truth across this multi-chain world. So it's just very core, very modular, and I think just speaks very cleanly to where we think the industry is going.
Awesome. And now over to you, Kenny. So tell us a bit more about LayerZero and how your platform streamlines cross-chain development to facilitate omnichain applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me today. LayerZero is an omnichain interoperability protocol. Right now, we are live on over 130 chains across multiple VMs, including EVM, Solana, and also MoveVM as well, with some of our recent integrations with Aptos and Movement. We essentially are the underneath fabric connecting all these different L1s and L2s. We allow for ease of developers to kind of deploy their application across multiple chains and therefore kind of future-proof themselves, right? In a way that doesn't fragment liquidity and is all kind of connected through universal semantics.
Awesome. And last but not least, Terry. So Terry, talk to us about Eclipse and how you're combining both Solana level performance with Ethereum security to bring more scalability in modular blockchain applications.
Yeah, so real quick, what Eclipse is Eclipse is an SVN-L2 on top of Ethereum. It settles to Ethereum, uses Celestia for DA, and uses the SVN, which is the transaction processing pipeline of Solana, including things like the transaction specifications, the local fee markets, in order to process transactions. So in essence, what it looks like, you bridge ETH from Ethereum onto our platform, and then you can use and have access to Solana level throughput and kind of fee market characteristics of Solana, as well as things that we're adding on to that virtual machine ecosystem.
Awesome. So let's first dig into the current state of where things stand at. Then we'll have later stage we'll look a bit at what have a bit of a technical focus on the development, and then dive into the use cases. But so let's start first with the current state. So Rob, Given zkVerify's position in the zero knowledge proof ecosystem, what challenges do you currently see blockchain projects are facing when it comes to verification, and how recent has the evolution of zk technology been, and how has that influenced your roadmap?
So I would say zk feels like the longest running brand new technology out there because it's been around a while. In fact, we, as an organization, launched the third project in Web3 using zk for Horizon today. And the way that I would characterize it is that it started from like very complex technology that was very kind of bespoke, and people would have to write their own independent circuits to basically program what kind of logic they wanted to prove. And it was really black box like. It was a black box like in a sort of like integrated framework that just wasn't dev friendly at all or user friendly. So now where we see it is we really decompose this to what we see as a value chain for zk. So you need to generate a proof. That proof is proving some piece of information that you want to bring on chain and make useful on chain. So you have a whole part of the architecture around just generating proofs. Then we have this problem in Web3 where we're running replicated databases, which means that we have a lot of things flowing through these little pipes in Web3, and having a lot of proofs just doesn't work very well, very computationally intensive. And so people have started doing things like aggregating proofs to basically batch them together. And then ultimately at the end of the day, you have to verify all the proofs. So what we're doing, just based on our experience from multiple levels, from running execution layers to working interoperability protocols and so forth, we realized that we just need a single unifying framework so that at the very lowest level on the verification side, we can just provide a one-stop shop. So developers don't have to write their own verifiers and deploy them on every single piece of blockchain infrastructure or L1 or 2 that they care about. They don't have to do security audits for all of them. They don't need to maintain them all. They don't need to worry about their users being able to work with them. Like, we just provide that one-stop shop where we're the experts on this one piece of the value chain. We do it better than anyone else, and we just make it as easy as possible for developers.
And super interesting. And speaking of interoperability, and then let's move over to Kenny and LayerZero, right? You guys have been really at the core of enabling omnichain capabilities. Could you describe for us the state of adoption among developers that are integrating those types of solutions? Any shifts or trends that you've seen recently?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you look at LayerZero and you look at adoption in market, it's really easy to kind of tell how much of adoption we've picked up through these different asset issuers and some of the most heavily used assets in DeFi. If you look at the stablecoin landscape these days, I think inherently stablecoins are a very good use case for value transfer across chain because you have a stable unit of value going across chain. And so if you look at LayerZero, some of the assets that we've been able to onboard recently, Athena's USDE, SUSDE. We recently, partnered with the state of Wyoming to help them launch their Wyoming stablecoin. And then we also have notable assets like Bitcoin as well, and then different versions of LRTs and LSTs as well. So I think there's this very noticeable trend from, assets that primarily just sit within ETH DeFi to assets now that can go around to every ecosystem. So that's at the asset level. I think at the developer level, there's also a few noticeable shifts as well. If we take a look at like earlier iterations of DeFi, we'll notice that we have like a few key primitives, right? We have like our Uniswaps, we have our Aves, and we have things like Compound, right, that allow for basic swapping and borrow lending of assets. I think what we're noticing now these days is there's a shift from that to now protocols that facilitate omnichain DeFi. And what I mean by that is like the ability to swap assets across chain, right? I have asset A on chain X, I can now swap to asset B on chain Y. I have asset A that I can deposit as collateral and then borrow against that from like a completely different chain. So these very noticeable shifts from not only the asset level but the developer level. That's been a really cool and telling story.
So breaking the liquidity barriers, right, to
Exactly
be able to provide better financial products.
Yep, that's absolutely correct.
Awesome. And so Terry, what about you at Eclipse? You guys obviously are positioned at the intersection of modular blockchain development. So how would you characterize the current approach of the industry of combining layer 1 performance with layer 2 security? And what are the types of developments that are shaping your strategic priorities at Eclipse?
It's quite uncertain if there is a unified approach that the industry is taking right now. Like obviously there is a monolithic approach championed by Solana, although not entirely like taken exactly by Solana, considering that they also have offshoots that are doing application-specific sequencing and or ephemeral rollups and or what they call network extensions. People working on perp dexes off chain that settle to Solana with liquidity on Solana. Meanwhile, Ethereum has kind of also taken similar trajectories recently with a path to scale the L1 and a desire to have like a differential landscape of L2s where you can buy and get compute and block space that doesn't exist on the L1. And what that exactly is in terms of a functional substitution perspective is somewhat unclear in terms of the messaging that has come out of the EF. But in terms of like how L2 should think about recent developments in the market, it's ultimately that you have to think for the user and what the user wants and the ease of the user. And the user cares about a very seamless and fast trading experience with low slippage and low MEV in a composable and synchronous environment with a lot of the familiar tools that they have access to. A high quality wallet, a high quality DEX aggregator, a high quality DEX, and also dApps, which are actually, in fact, the chain's end customer. They actually care about revenue, they care about users, they care about distribution liquidity. And I guess like one recent development that we've seen is they care about strategic ordering of transactions that then affect their user experience. To elaborate on this a little bit, I think we've seen a lot of dApps either leave the L1, both on Ethereum and Solana, that require very low latency transaction ordering and or custom ordering policies. So for example, a lot of perp dexes are leaving the L1 so that they can do like make order prioritization and cancellation prioritization, and also like very low latency throughput transactions. We're seeing quite a couple, like even spot AMMs leaving the L1 so they can do things like, top of bundle, SexDex ARB transactions. We're even seeing like custom application specific sequenced NFT minting platforms, so you can enforce first come first serve. So I think like giving dApp developers optionality on the way they sequence transactions and the way they dictate value flow in their ecosystem, that's very important, and that's a trend that is accelerating.
Super interesting. So let's shift gears a little bit and look more at the technical side of things. I'll move over back, or unless anyone wants to make any other comment on the current state and trends that you're seeing. Are good? Okay, so let's move over to the technical side of things. So Rob, you guys at zkVerify, you're addressing high costs and complexities associated with the proof verification. How is your platform reducing those costs, and particularly for proofs that are challenging to verify directly on Ethereum?
Yeah, I mean, so just because we are specializing specifically in proof verification, it's just way easier to hit scale and collapse costs. So the way we collapse costs is really just with dedicated Rust native verifiers and not having to compete with other network traffic like you would have on an EVM. So these just very basic kind of isolating elements of the architecture get the cost really low. And that's part of the story, right? But again, like it goes beyond just cost verification or cost reduction, because it's also just enabling applications just couldn't operate on other layers like on Ethereum. So as an example, we have a private DeFi application that uses Noir's programming language that was built out of Aztec. And just verifying single ZK proofs there, it ranges in the like hundreds of dollars range. Right? Just right away cuts off part of the demand curve for usage. Right? Working with us is your verification cost is in the pennies versus in the hundreds of dollars. So that alone just is an enabling element, but then it's also a throughput thing. So what we're building for is not just for the current state of Web3, which we think is really just in its infancy. It's also for what we think would be a trillion proof world, where every single application that's out there, from your phone to hardware devices to every kind of computer, mobile device and so forth, will be generating proofs, right? And the proofs will be coming out of like AI algorithms. The proofs will be coming out of just kind of Web3 native like interactions that are going on. And this just kind of flood of proofs just can't process through the current infrastructure. It's just impossible. And like one just stat there is that if Ethereum did nothing but verify ZK proofs, it would hit something like 50 proofs per block, which is just, every 12 seconds or so, that's just not going to hit the kind of scale that we think the world is heading towards.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. So you're both scaling not just the cost, right, but the computability to have a lot more of those proofs done and increase the throughput.
Exactly. And even just to make things possible that aren't possible, right? There's certain proof types, like if you want to do a state snapshot of an SQL database off chain, this could just be massively computationally heavy. It's just not something that, even on the verifier side, which people typically think about zk, like in the cryptographic weeds, as being very computationally heavy on proof generation and light on verification. But there's some proof types, depending what you're trying to actually, what kind of data you want to get on chain, that even the verifiers themselves are computationally heavy. So it's sort of not just a cost reduction element, but and bandwidth expansion massively so, but also just different types of things that you can't do with cryptography today in the current state of the world that we enable.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And interesting. And Kenny, on LayerZero's side, so you guys are focusing, and you have significantly advanced all the cross-chain messaging protocol, right? Can you describe the technical rationale that's behind the DVNs, the decentralized verifier networks, and how is that architecture enhancing cross-chain security compared to the traditional bridges?
Yeah, for sure. I think to take a step back, LayerZero is a true protocol in the sense that we uphold three key principles. The first one is permissionlessness, right? So anyone can build on LayerZero. Also, subsequently, anyone can verify cross-chain messages sent on LayerZero through our DVN, or decentralized verifier network. Two, we have immutability. All of our core contracts are non-upgradable, right? We think there are a number of security trade-offs and enhancements that are kind of introduced through non-upgradable contracts. And then the third is censorship resistant, right? So anytime a message is emitted from our protocol, it cannot be altered or changed in any way. And so DVNs, or decentralized verifier networks, kind of hit more on the first one, right? These are permissionless parties that can kind of spin up their own method of verifying cross-chain messages sent on LayerZero. And the idea is really to kind of appeal to the developer and make sure that there's some sort of like modular security stack that they can choose that ultimately benefits their application the best. And what I mean by that is that like all of these DVNs have their own independent verification methods that sit somewhere on this like cost security scale, right? And so if I'm like a game sending a bunch of like NFT microtransactions, I don't necessarily need to focus more on security, right? I can probably optimize more for speed. However, if I'm like a cross-chain borrow lending protocol that's securing billions of TVL, I want to probably focus more on the security side. So that's kind of our way to appeal to the developer and make sure that like they can ultimately choose the best security configuration that's suited for their use case or for their need. Which is a pretty stark difference from what we had in LayerZero v1. So in LayerZero v1, we just had an Oracle and relayer. What an Oracle do was fetch block headers and pass them from chain to chain. And then the relayer would fetch the transaction proof. And then if those two came to agreement, then you'd consider the transaction valid and final. What we have now is like you have a message that's emitted through the source chain. And then that goes through the decentralized verifier network. So any specification that the application chooses, right? Like we follow an X of Y of N model where you can specify, I want LayerZero and Polyhedra to verify on this, and I can have like Google Cloud as optional. Once all those DVNs then sign off, that's delivered to the destination chain endpoints. And then that's kind of how we have the newest architecture introduced. So again, just like a method to one, open up the doors for anyone to verify cross-chain messages sent on LayerZero. And then two, ultimately appeal to the developer and make sure that like we have their best needs at hand and they're choosing the best security stack for their application.
Yeah. So you're letting the developers choose the right balance that they need.
Exactly. Yep.
Awesome. And when it comes to really high performance application, so moving over to you, Terry, since Eclipse blends both Solana's high performance execution with security of Ethereum, what's your guys' technical approach to effectively integrating these blockchain environments? And what are the types of challenges that you're encountering in doing so?
Technical challenges. I guess like right now, our big focus has been on performance. So we want to get Eclipse to a point of performance where it is like 2 orders, 3 orders of magnitude better than the alternative. Right now we've peaked at 9,000 TPS. We can steady state do like 3,000 user TPS. And so like getting that 2 orders of magnitude higher, like that is definitely a non-trivial task. Of course, there's quite a lot of other people in the arena who are like trying to strive towards similar goals. And it's both a competitive and a very rewarding market if you can win. I'd say that's largely the difficulty there. Like the specific difficulty, if you ask, of blending Ethereum and Solana together, that I don't think our team has encountered something that is like too unknown.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so and how do you interact with the rest of the ecosystems and your approach and strategic approach to the development?
So my current thesis is that all blockchains are 100% margin systems. Like all blockchains operate on 100% take rate and 100% margin. In essence, if you want to use a dApp, the dApp can charge a front-end fee and the dApp can charge a smart contract fee. But a lot of the execution revenue as well as MEV that is generated by the dApp, all of it goes to stakers and or the sequencer. And so we're in the state where if you are a chain that has sufficient liquidity and distribution and can snap that away from the base layer, you have an infinite incentive to go build your own chain. And you see a lot of app chains for that reason, right? If you can siphon off liquidity, if you can siphon off your user base, then you have infinite incentive to build your own infrastructure. It's kind of the extension of pump building pump swap. They should, if they can, build a pump chain. And so, like, I think this strategic direction we're moving in, we've been very vocal about this. I think a lot of developers have also been vocal about this, is that developers and app devs should own the right to define their own sequencing if they want to. And they should also own a portion of the execution and MEV revenue generated by the chain. And that seems to be a very obvious kind of direction that the industry is going in. What that will result in, I think, is much more interesting than the actual realization itself. The market structure will look very different from what it does today. Apps will become heavier and heavier and accrue much more value, as they should. And then it's a matter of, can you drive your technical capability to actually become a focal point for all dApps to want, where they like the value of being on and sharing liquidity, the distribution that you bring, the synchronicity that you bring with existing dApps in your ecosystem, like that actually is larger than the revenue that they can get off or they can get individually by being on their own infrastructure. And like that balancing equation will happen, in my opinion, in a local flea market enabled high throughput L2. And it is Eclipse's job to try to win that market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Rob and Kenny, feel free to chime in on this if you have any comments you want to make.
I mean, I just think that's a super cool concept of thinking about the economics between dApps and the infrastructure that they're building on. So totally agree with Terry's perspective.
Okay. And so let's take a step back and think about what are the technical advancements or infrastructure improvements that you believe are critical to achieve this, to have a secure, efficient, scalable, multi-chain ecosystem, right? Terry, you pointed to the fact that it's not right. It's not you want to provide that platform that that has the technical power that promotes building on top of that platform versus building a new platform, but that there is also some kind of economic incentives to be rethought through, where although that promotes that if you don't have the right economic alignment, then you promote fragmentation, right? But when it comes to technical aspects, what do you all believe is critical and missing right now?
I mean, I'll just chime in, because we're always trying to think, at least a couple of years in the future of where we think the industry is going. I do think that, for a variety of reasons, maybe kind of misplaced incentives or whatever, and maybe part of that Terry was touching on, where it made sense for people, and my company was part of various waves of the industry's evolution, and I think we just siloed a lot. right? So then like we just had so many different platforms that were launching, different L1s, like back in the day when, I say it was cool to kind of fork a GitHub repo and launch an L1. Then L2s became a thing, right? And then, like we had kind of the Cosmos SDK to launch different chains. And we set a variety of different evolutions of where the industry, experimented, I'll say. And then you had projects coming along like LayerZero, as a great example of actually unifying a lot of these things and realizing that we've just built a lot of different silos and they can't be silos forever. A bunch of them are going to go away, a bunch of them are going to merge, right? Or some will just be kind of dominant in a sort of winner-take-all environment. We're not sure where the industry is going, right? There's still a lot of really interesting experiments going on, but I think the things that have to happen are like the interoperability elements. Like we have to, like those things that will survive or those that are not siloed. I do think that this idea of even like, as an example, like our organization is launching or migrating Horizon over to being an L3 on base. And like our goal is strategically, like we are not going to try to play the liquidity game. We're not going to try to get $1 billion in liquidity TVL on Horizon. It just doesn't make sense, right? We're way better off providing a method to tap what exists at the L2 or the base level, right? So I think that the things that need to happen is we need to not only be able to transfer assets anywhere, we need to be able to tap TVL liquidity anywhere, at least according to, areas that comply with some standards, right? We need to be able to share information across this entire Web3 landscape. So the elements that end up blending these types of technical substrates, I think are going to be part of the kind of evolutionarily healthy part of our industry that will probably dominate, right? I don't think it's going to be dominating from one chain perspective. I don't think it'll be dominating from one particular asset perspective, but I do think that it'll be kind of like a set of standards that end up working well together, that end up like bringing it all together in a synergistic way. And then the crypto economics really matters as well. Like, again, just to reinforce Terry's point, is you can have great tech, but just the wrong incentives completely, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and just kind of adding to that, I think to Rob's point, there's also a number of like just things that we need to do along the user abstraction front, because with all these chains, like you're introducing hundreds and hundreds of chains, each with their like own unique ecosystems and their own unique validator set, right? And like for someone who's onboarding onto DeFi, that's going to be very difficult to navigate, right? Just the fact that there are like multiple chains that they need to be aware of, like if I just like some level of knowledge that's inherent. Maybe for us, it's easier since we've been in this space for some time. But like, if I'm a new user, I need to know to go to X chain and use, a certain application of that chain to accomplish whatever it is that I want to do. I think that's like a huge knowledge gap. And so I think like kind of having like better abstraction services. And I think things are like EIP 7702 are doing are super cool and probably like help to that front. But also maybe just like the front end experience, right? Like if I'm a user, I want to be able to have like a single user abstracted front end where like I know what's going on each part of that. And then even for things like a wallet, which everyone who uses DeFi or uses on chain has to interact with, I think to that front, like not having to even do something as simple as like click multiple times to get a swap through, but maybe just like click one time. I think those are all things that probably need to be solved as well going forward.
I'll say a very generic answer and go into why. It's probably not a tech constraint, it's an app constraint. We need interesting dApps. Now that is, let me dive into it. A lot of the dApps that have very fundamental PMF today are essentially ways you can get leverage. Like all of DeFi is a way you can get leverage, and right, truly all of DeFi is a way to get leverage. And so like these products have fundamental PMF because there is net new asset creation that is speculative in nature, and the velocity is very fast. And in order to participate in these markets, you want to gain leverage so that you can amplify your returns. What we probably need for the industry to mature further is durable sources of block-based demand that don't rely on the need to get leverage in a highly speculative market. And a lot of people think, oh no, crypto is just for speculation. Actually, there's like pockets of evidence that this exists today already. Obviously, number one is like stablecoin payments. Everyone uses this example. Number two is DePIN, specifically like DePIN token incentives as a business model for growth incentives. I think Helium has shown this best. I think Dawn protocol is some more where it's like very evident, as in like they have a functional Web2 product of wireless Wi-Fi devices, and then now they're using token incentives for growth incentives because they find it hard to actually ask people to install these antennas, whereas they posit or they hypothesize that if they were to use token incentives, they could add fuel to that growth. So there is definitely pockets of there's obviously the Bitcoin as a store of value use case, and then kind of the unlocking of that store of value in the case of emergency payments or medium of exchange. These non-speculative leverage use cases all exist today, and obviously there's markets where you can buy and sell spot Bitcoin and leverage per Bitcoin. That is a market that exists today as well, with a tremendous amount of volume and value flow. And what probably needs to happen is more of these use cases that don't require a high velocity speculative asset creation boom need to come onto the space. And then once there is actually an app that people want to use, they won't need privy. They'll figure it out. It's all of us, we figured it out. How do we do it? We use MetaMask. We still figured out how to get a seed phrase and how to get ETH on a platform and transact. I think I don't ascribe to myself such high above average intelligence that I'm saying, oh, I could figure it out, but then some other random person who uses normal consumer products can't. And the truth is, I had a rationale to figure out because there were specifically for myself, I wanted to access Bitcoin and ETH as a store of value, living in a politically unstable country. So ultimately, it's just the more reason you give people to jump through the hoops, of which I'm not saying, a lot of people say, oh, you need people to jump through the hoops, and then they don't give actual concrete examples of all these success cases that are happening in crypto today. So it sounds very dystopian. I'm okay, what are you in the industry for? But I'm saying, actually, I see a ton of use cases that people are excited about that are fundamental, that are generating real revenue, that are very durable sources of crypto demand. Probably what we just need is an expansion of this. And ultimately, another thing I want to address is there's a definite form of malaise on crypto Twitter right now, just because I think a lot of people are saying, the vast majority of the industry does not have a particular purpose, whatever. I just want to point out that I don't necessarily think it is an issue with fundamental products in crypto, but rather it's just an issue of them over underwriting the time it takes to bring some of these things to market, right? A lot of people are saying, oh, crypto gaming has failed. You've only given these guys 3 years, 4 years, right? Who knows? You got to give them a little bit more time. There's definitely energy there. There's 200,000-300,000 people that actually play crypto games. Just give these guys a little bit more time to build, and then have some patience.
Mm-hmm. And it's a great segue to ask Kenny on LayerZero, right? You guys support a lot of different applications across NFTs, lending, gaming, governance. Is there anything you want to highlight? Anything especially you find especially innovative or an unexpected use case that was enabled by LayerZero?
Yeah, for sure. I think there are two that really come to mind. The first one is a lot of the work that we've been able to do with Berachain and Boyko. Boyko obviously incentivized action market, where if I'm a user and I have capital in the form of different assets, I can then choose to kind of redeposit those to a pre-live mainnet chain or a chain that's not yet live. And then when that chain does go live, it'll be deposited into the application that I specified in. And so what we were able to do is set up these vaults of assets on ETH L1, where users could then deposit, earn some points or earn some yield for whatever was being offered on Boyko. And then when the chain eventually did go live, their assets would just be there, right? Through some mix of LayerZero tech, where if the assets were OFTs or omnichain fungible tokens, they'd simply be transferred using LayerZero from ETH L1 to then, Berachain. And then a mix of blockchain shortcuts as well through Enzo. And so in theory, what we're able to do is solve this cold start problem that a lot of blockchains have, where it's I need to run some massive incentive program as soon as my chain goes live, and I need liquidity to flow in ASAP, or a lot of these applications aren't going to have a lot of they're not going to have user demand because they don't have the liquidity necessary for that. And so I think day one, we were able to move somewhere in the tune of $2.1 to $2.25 billion over from ETH L1 to Berachain. And so I think that's a really cool and innovative use case, where we are enabling chains to have day one liquidity through the use of these pre-deposit vault campaigns, where you simply just have these vaults on like other chains that are live and that have like more liquidity. And then when your chain does go live, you're able to transport all of that and then just have users and developers kind of leverage a lot of that liquidity. The second one is what we're doing with our new data primitive called LZ-Read, which essentially enables applications and developers to kind of read state data from any chain and then pass it back to some application on some source chain, right? And I think one of the easiest and most relatable use cases is shadow NFTs. And so think of like Bored Ape Yacht Club, the collection, right? Like super native to Ethereum L1, but then you also do have these chains like Ape Chain, which is an Arbitrum Orbit L3, where they might want to provide some sort of like power up or benefit to these Ape Chain, to these like Bored Ape Yacht Club holders on ETH L1. What LZ-Read enables you to do is kind of read that data or check for verifiable ownership of that NFT on ETH L1 and then pass that back to Ape Chain to consume, right? So if there's like an ecosystem dApp that wants to offer, some sort of cool perk for these ape holders, we're providing them an avenue to do so through LZ-Read. So I think those two recently are the ones that come to mind, being able to solve a lot of these cold start liquidity issues for chains, and then also being able to leverage and just read state data between different chains.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Rob? Any examples of how teams or applications have been using zkVerify to enhance verification processes or privacy?
Yeah, I mean, so one is like a private dark pools, basically. So it's an easy concept to understand, right? Like traders, especially institutional traders, don't want all their flows to be out there in the open on a blockchain, right? So that's one, and that's actually one of the use cases that just deploying on Ethereum was just it was the one that I talked about using the Noir programming language, which just took too much money to verify to be really feasible for a part of the demand curve on trading. But then there's others. So like what I'm maybe like a partial go back on the last question and blending it here is I think some of the things that are going to be really necessary to kind of get this world of very rich applications like Terry was talking about on chain is we're going to need to bring a lot of off-chain information on chain. Clearly we have oracles and there's a whole kind of sophisticated part of our industry dealing with that. But there are also cryptographic tools like something called zkTLS is something really interesting to us. And we have one customer that's using zkVerify that is basically like using our platform to verify information that they're bringing off chain. And the simple kind of way to understand this is when your web browser is doing a secure handshake with like your bank's server, and then delivering content to your browser, like we could do a zk proof or kind of a state snapshot of the content that was delivered, and also verifying that it came from the correct server, generate a privacy preserving proof here so that the entire on-chain world isn't viewing your bank account, for instance, but still get that information on chain and be able to use that in interesting ways. So to just kind of like wrap it up here, I think that on-chain privacy or privacy for information, especially like sensitive information that you're bringing, like I think off-chain, these are those big components that have to happen to get those interesting applications.
Yeah, and when you say, just for listeners, when you say zkTLS, you mean like the layer security, right?
Transport layer security. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So for our listeners, it's, when you see the little lock when you're on a website that says that this is the right website you're on, that's what Rob is referring to. Cool. Awesome. And so Terry, what about you? Any examples that Eclipse has built you want to highlight?
Yeah. So like once you have incredible speeds, once you have incentive alignment, like the types of applications that we're seeing that are in the early stages of being built at Eclipse are largely twofold. One is you require very high throughput. So exchanges, like that is the very like in your face type of design. And the number two, like the second type that does require very high throughput we've seen is people who are doing high velocity data transfer. So we'll have some more about this in the future. And then the second part is we've seen people who require incredible amount of volume of like value transfer and payments at very, very low cost. So we have a couple of games like social lottery games, perhaps that's what I might call them, where hundreds of people transfer very small amounts of money to a shared pool, play a very short-term game, and then someone is paid out from it. And we have quite a lot of these. We've kind of fostered a culture where people like iterating these type of experiments on Eclipse. But like any other chain, right? Like you're really transferring 25 cents into the prize pool. Like if that costs even like 5 cents, it's just not okay. You're not going to be able to run this business model on that, especially if you're taking a percentage of earnings. So like we've seen those experiments where it's like low value transfers at high velocity.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing. So let's look at the future now. Moving forward and looking ahead, right? What key advancements do you expect to be shaping the interoperability in that multi-chain landscape? We're trying to move everything on chain, but focusing on the next 12 to 18 months, not the next 20 years, right? What are the types of catalysts that you expect to participate in this and help accelerate the developments?
I mean, I'll just roll right into the things I've been talking about, just reinforce it a little bit, though. I do think that on-chain privacy is going to be really important, and I think the ability to get off-chain info on-chain is going to matter a lot. And a lot of these things are just not going to be not possible or not cool to do unless you're preserving privacy for people. So I think going deeper from there, then I think there'll be sort of standards like interoperability standards. I mean, we're positioning zkVerify to be sort of in that domain as well, where once truth is verified once, like with us, it could be used anywhere within Web3 or even off chain. Right? So I think things like this, they're just kind of big enablers, are going to be part of that future being possible.
Yep. I think to Terry's earlier point, if you have really compelling applications that create user demands, I think those probably, if there is an app chain built for that, I think that probably kind of strengthens the interoperability landscape as well. I think if you take a look at what Hyperliquid's been able to do, it's really impressive. I think the other day I was doing some digging around, and 65% of the USDC on Arbitrum sits within the Hyperliquid deposit contract. And we've kind of seen that embedded in the data that we have from Stargate as well. Bridging volumes to Stargates from Stargate to Arbitrum have gone through the roof over the past year or so. And so I think a lot of that is driven by needs for users to kind of go and try out these applications that are garnering a lot of buzz, or that provide that have found real product market fit, and then using those in a way where they have their own chain. I think that really shows how you can use all these different blockchains, right? Hyperliquid is its own L1, but they do have this deposit contract on Arbitrum, and then they have their own EVM chain as well. I think that, but you just think of it as kind of one product suite, right? So I think more along the lines of those types of instances are probably things that would make DeFi and just Interop very strong going forward.
Yeah, for better or for worse, we're going to see a lot of consolidation. So actually, I don't think what will happen is we have easier infrastructure that connects all the chains. Of course, we are going to have easier infrastructure that connects all the chains. But what's most likely going to happen is we're just going to get massive levels of consolidation, right? Multiple chains are going to fall out of irrelevance, and that's okay. That's just how the market works, right? If you work for one of those teams, so be it. If that is a fate that befalls upon us, so be it. We tried our best. We were in the arena. We tried things. And what's going to happen is largely a lot of the activity that are on these chains, and therefore we require this world of immense interoperability, are going to consolidate into a couple that have distribution, and then those chains are going to end up having value redistribution as well as custom sequencing. That basically allows the functionality of having your own chain baked into one chain. Obviously, the best contenders there right now are Base and Solana. They are also working towards those visions, right? So Base, they're working toward very high throughput. They're working toward low latency transaction confirmation. I'm sure next is on economics, the Base team, and I have chatted about it. And then on the other side, on Solana, you have MCP with MEV taxes, which has been pushed by both Dan Robinson and Max Resnick for a long time. I'm 100% sure there is a team internally working on it, considering how much they talk about chain GDP and app revenue. And yeah, I think the next 18 months is actually not a world of additional fragmentation with more interconnectedness and synchronicity. I think it's actually one of consolidation.
Okay, so we have one point for consolidation, so fewer chains, right, and more. So in a sense, leading to a more seamless experience for users, right? But as the blockchain infrastructure matures, is there a way for developer experiences to evolve and be in that highly multi-chain world and still have seamless chain-agnostic applications?
Yeah, for sure. There's people like Infinix. Like fundamentally, the sex experience is like a multi-chain experience. It's definitely something that can happen over time. But I actually don't think that is the direction that we'll go. The current state of multi-chain UX kind of sucks. Not in the sense of like you are required to bridge to multiple places, but even like people who are trying to do multi-chain UX, like cross-chain borrowing, cross-chain lending, and or if you look at Uniswap or 1inch with MetaMask and or Rappi, and you look at their multi-chain functionality, like it's very confusing. Like you choose ETH on one chain, and then there's like 5 different ETHs. If you click ETH on Uniswap, there's like 5 different ETHs. And then you click USDC, there's like 7 different USDCs, and then they're all on different chains. And it's a bit of a confusing experience. I don't necessarily think, I think there's validity to the criticism that abstracting away the security of which chain you're on is a dangerous proposition. So for example, if you have like a solver network that's just routing to the best spreads across any other chain, I think some users might not want that type of experience just because, like there are chains that I would personally not want to park my ETH on. And so like that's why I'm generally not a proponent of like more chains with abstraction and better linkage, but rather consolidation with economic incentives.
I'm a fan of both, actually, just in terms of where I think the future is going. So I think we can see both things happen. I think the consolidation is definitely a big part of what's going to be happening. But I also think that what does remain is going to need to be highly interoperable and composable in different ways. Also secure, and I think that security trade-off is also kind of taken too lightly at times.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like either way, we're pretty agnostic, right? If there's more chains that exist in perpetuity, it's more avenues for us. But also at the same time, if there's like user activity that really boils down to like a few group of core chains, and there's like just like very high frequency, like bridging and message sending between those chains, I think we're pretty open to that outcome as well. I think we are starting to see signs of like the consolidation thesis playing out, right? Like I think if you look at Solana, very high trading avenue, like almost like a trading layer for DeFi, right? Like where even for the new pump swap AMM, they're onboarding not just meme coins, but rather like these kind of like centralized exchange tokens to onboard onto their AMM to trade. And then you can actually bridge those out through OFTs to like their native network. What I mean by that is like, we have Aptos APT token on Solana. That's an OFT that you can bridge back out to like the Aptos layer 1 and then start using that for gas transaction fees, whatever you want. And then we have like, chains like Hyperliquid that are more along the lines of like perp dex trading and like just for like another avenue of speculation almost. So I think we probably consolidate into a few chains that people just use for different purposes. And then and I think that's given credence to a lot of these kind of like thesis driven or, these like more narrative driven chains that have come out this cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in any case, whether we have full consolidation toward a few chains or, as you mentioned, specialization of different chains for different applications, what is the role of some sort of cross-chain standards or some kind of, and to Rob's point as well on interoperability, right? What's the role of some kind of framework that really fosters that interactions between blockchains?
I mean, I think it's big. We're making a bet on it with zkVerify, and that we think that if we're a source of truth, that you can verify some piece of information, whether it came from off-chain or on a particular chain, but make use of it somewhere else. We think that's important. We think that that's kind of valuable and enabling here towards that multi-chain or cross-chain vision. But I think there's going to be multiple pieces of that infrastructure. We're trying to tackle it in kind of our ZK native way.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're pretty big on cross-chain standards. We have like our OFT and ONFT standard, right? So omnichain fungible token, omnichain non-fungible token. We think having a set of standards that developers kind of have to adhere to is probably better for the developer experience as a whole, right? If I'm expanding to a new chain and I've used like OFT to get to another chain previously, then I know in my mind it's like a very similar developer experience. And then, the more adoption that we get along those lines, I think is just better for people looking to deploy assets on multiple chains. And then not only that, but also like unite those instances, right? I think what we're providing is a pretty tangible shift from what happened in like 2021, where you had these like wrapped asset bridges where you can bridge off one way from like ETH to Solana, but you can't bridge to any other chain, or you'd introduce like double or triple wrapping to other chains. I think to the point where like you can deploy natively your assets on any chain and then kind of create this mesh network where I can go from chain A to chain B to chain C back to chain A is probably just better for the user and developer experience as a whole.
Yep. And Terry, any view on the cross-chain standards, or who should contribute to those?
Not in particular. They're getting better by the day.
Awesome. Well, final set of quick questions to close out that discussion then. So, and big question, what are the type of things, how can the broader crypto industry better position itself to embrace a secure, intuitive, multi-chain future with interoperability, easy ways to verify, to do zk proofs? What can be done to be in a better strategic position?
I mean, the obvious answer is use zkVerify. So definitely need to say that. But I mean, there's a lot of other kind of nuance there as well. I do think that we didn't talk about it in this panel, but the kind of administrative shift or the kind of regulatory shift in the US is interesting for us as well, especially because our history came about from the privacy coin segment of our industry, which did have a bit of hardship on previous kind of historically in terms of being governments accepting it. But I think that now it seems that there is, I mean, I'll just say it, I feel like the war on crypto is over. So like we'll see where the industry ends up going, but I think the war on crypto within the US is over. So it opens up just interesting and different pathways for projects to be successful. And I'm not saying pandering to the US government as an example, but just doing things that are regulatory compliant, right? And regulatory compliance being interesting for probably a whole cross section of applications that we're going to see coming on chain that previously probably were hesitant to come on chain, or institutions coming on chain. So I think some of these things are going to shift. Now, for them to come on in intelligent ways and leverage standards of interoperability, standards of proof value chains and so forth, I think it would make it even better for them.
Yep. And Kenny and Terry, if you have anything to add on this, so how to better position yourself as a crypto builder?
Yeah, I think core to kind of like inspiring more developers and more applications to create these very unique on-chain experiences, probably developer safety, right? Like no developer wants to put out something that's unsafe and potentially face like a bunch of angry users who claim that they got rugged. And so I think we're doing a few things on that front. We have the highest bug bounty in the space at $15 million. And then we also have a lot of the things that you alluded to earlier, which is our DBN network, where developers can really feel safe crafting these like really unique, tailored security stacks for their own application. And then also just like getting more adoption that way, right? So I think like those are all key, and we've seen that play out. I think that's why a lot of asset issuers have chosen to build on top of LayerZero. A lot of these like cross-chain experiences are facilitated through LayerZero. So I think just where possible, like enabling the developer and providing these really unique like tooling sets that allow developers to feel safe in what they're building is probably going to be key.
Yeah, I echo that statement. But I also think it's kind of like an ebb and flow type of thing. I think especially as like AI robotics matures, like these are incredibly centralizing forces, and I think there's definitely an undercurrent of consciousness towards the requirement that we retain personal sovereignty both over our like personal data as well as just like our general behavior in a world where there are incredibly centralizing, very, very high growth network effect industries that are on the other side, right? And I think perhaps it is just like, you see this chart a lot on Twitter, which is like the number of developers in crypto is trending down. I don't know if that is necessarily a symptom of something like that is fundamental to the crypto industry versus just something that will rebound back over time as people realize that like crypto is a very like fundamental technology that you need, especially going forward.
Mm-hmm. Or developers being replaced by AI. No, I'm just kidding. Awesome. All right, so I think we're getting almost to a close. So just to end with this conversation, I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to tell us more about anything coming up that we should be excited about this year, any milestone developments that we should expect from your organization, and if you want to share also where people can find you. And Rob, you can feel free to start.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the big thing for us is zkVerify is in testnet. It's been in testnet for about 6 months now, and we're going to be launching later this summer. So that would be the big thing for us. We'll actually get into production and start generating proofs for real, not just on testnet. In terms of getting a hold of me, I'm on X, Rob Viglione. You can go to horizonlabs.io or zkverify.io.
Yeah, on the LayerZero side, I think we've been able to hit 130 chains, which is really impressive. Just taking a step back, right? Like I think in a lot of people's minds, there's maybe only like 10 chains, and so the fact that we are able to secure that many chains and like provide interop to that many chains in a kind of like mesh style fashion, I think is really impressive. And then just like the amount of assets that we've been able to get on board, right? Like Wyoming stablecoin, USDT Zero, WPTC. I think more and more as we continue to kind of like onboard these asset issuers into integrating the UFT standard, the more prevalent it'll become that, you know, these assets are all kind of supported by LayerZero. Where you can find me, I'm on Twitter as well, or LinkedIn or Telegram.
We're Eclipse FND on Twitter. I'm 0xTTHoho on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, that concludes our Innovator webinar on interoperability and the multi-chain future of L1s, L2s, and maybe L3s. Fascinating discussion, you know, seeing all the different trade-offs they're playing, and we'll see over the next couple of months, years, you know, whether we consolidate towards that, you know, few chains, or if we go into we stay in a highly multi-chain future with different applications that are specialized. In any case, thank you so much for joining, to all our panelists for joining today. Thank you to all the listeners for listening in, and see you at the next one. Have a good one.